But today, I'm very pleased to be hosting Manny Stockman, who's a principal in the technology area for Osage University Partners. Manny's been with Osage since 2015, following stints in industry, and has an engineering background himself. Um, Manny and Osage are very close partners with the University of Pennsylvania and PCI specifically in helping us grow our and actually initiate some early stage startups based on Penn technology. And he brings a lot of experience working with faculty on early stage ideas and entrepreneurs and kind of translating those into the market. So we're excited to welcome him, and I'll let him provide further introduction, and we'll certainly have lots of time for questions, which I can lightly moderate through the chat or throughout the presentation. Thank you, and Manny, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. All right. Thanks, Lori. I dressed up for everyone today, so this is probably the fanciest shirt I've had on in 2 or 3 months. Quick background on my team at OUP, our fund at OUP. We're actually based in Bala Cynwyd, just outside the city. We started alongside Lori's office with some ideas that came when the University of Pennsylvania was brainstorming with our sister fund on opportunities to invest in university startups. And that was back in 2008, and the core thesis hasn't really changed since then. We partner with university tech transfer offices where they let us know about startups that are coming out of faculty and grad student research that are spun out of their research licensed to the startups. And we look for opportunities to invest in those startups, just given the relationship we have with the university. In return, the university gets a portion of our fund's carry, which is our profit. And so it hopefully gives money back to the university, which creates a nice win-win. But we're also, as over time, have found the most valuable thing we can do beyond money is just adding to the ecosystem, being a presence on campus, talking to really anyone that's interested in learning about startups, because our view is startups at a universities take a long time to evolve, and we need to be helpful early on, and also be tracking them over time for the right time to invest. So we have been a partner with Penn now for 12 years. We've, I think, invested in 7 or 8 Penn startups. And overall, our portfolio is around 80 startups that we've invested in across the 100 universities that partner with us. And we're a decently sized fund, not a mega fund. Our current fund's $275 million, and it's our 3rd fund. So that's all I'll say about OUP, unless people have questions to filter in. I'm happy to talk about that today or offline. But I wanted to take this chance to just tell you all about the university startup ecosystem, what we've seen, what I've seen in 5 years of doing this, what our team's seen in 12 years of doing it, and hopefully motivate you all to think about a startup. It's a strange time in the economy and the venture community and the startup ecosystem, but it's still uncertain how things are going to play out. So it could either be a good time to take this virtual period to brainstorm around a startup, and that's what I just wanted to talk to you all about today. So that's me. I'm an engineer, PhD in applied physics and aerospace engineering. Thanks for the introduction, Lori. But I just thought I'd start. I don't know what the background of the audience is, but I think COVID is obviously continually on everyone's mind, and we have some just observations that may be valuable for you all. I'm not going to go deeply into this, but the general feeling about COVID in the venture community, in the startup community, is that this could be a real, change of pace in the way deals are done, and it's mostly because of one, people are just being less productive. Companies that were building hardware or doing clinical trials are slowing down because of the impact, and corporate buyers of software are slowing down because their budgets have been impacted. So overall, I'd say the general venture community, if you were trying to raise a round right now, you'd find it much more difficult than it was 3 or 4 months ago. And it's mostly just driven by a decent bit of uncertainty. People don't know how this is going to hit the economy. Our team is very conservative. I think this could be a bad hit to the economy, which actually sometimes creates great opportunities for startups. So we're still open to investments, and I think you'll find that a lot of investors are. It's just that the bar has gotten a little bit higher if you're asking for money today. So, across the ecosystem, startups are, laying off people. They're riffing. It's called reduction in force, where some tech companies are laying off people. Life science companies have fared a little bit better because they're sort of a splinter squad anyway. And they're, reducing hiring. And, I think these are the things that if you have a startup now, you're very familiar with, but as you think about building a company and preparing for starting a company in what could be a VC downturn, there's just some things to think about. This is brand new territory. This is a recession, a likely recession coming that isn't quite reflected in the public markets right now, but I think it's going to be soon. And so that creates a crush on venture funds funding sources, which means that fewer venture funds will be able to raise their capital in the next year or two, which means there's going to be less money on the market for startups to raise from venture funds. So if you are raising now, it's going to be tough. If you had just raised 3 or 4 months ago, cheers to you. If you're a venture fund and you've got a lot of what's called dry powder, like we have with our new fund, it feels pretty good. And we expect that there's going to be some opportunities that pop up out of this because valuations should come down. As I'll show later, venture dollars have been pouring into the startup industry for several years now. And this was not the event that everyone thought would trigger a return to normal, but it is going to be a significant event that reduces valuations across the industry. And I think that will be a good change of pace. It's just been a little too aggressive in the past couple of years, and I'd say the balance has been in favor of startups in a way that usually this is played out with in valuations, and it might just be a little harder to access capital. So the specifically for the audience today, I thought I'd just comment on the impact on engineering or technology startups. So this has been a strong time for technology startups. Software startups have been really driving the startup industry for the past several years. Some of them are suffering, but some areas have seen tailwinds. So cybersecurity companies have a new role in this world where obviously a virtual environment requires certain levels of security that corporate environments weren't set up with. Robotics and automation should and this was their moment, and unfortunately the world didn't really bring in and adopt robotics fast enough for them to save our supply chain. But I think in the long term it's a net win, a net positive for robotics and automation, ranging from industrial robotics to surveying drones to autonomous cars. But in the near term, because a lot of robotics companies are still doing installations, still doing pilots, there's still short-term challenges for them. And I think that could play out for the next year or two as social distancing applies to the corporate world for at least another year. So I think you'll find that venture investors, depending on who you talk to, have a range of views like us, conservative, raising the bar really high for deals right now, to what I hear from some of my friends on the West Coast, which sounds like it's kind of like venture deals as usual, still paying pretty high premiums, wanting to get deals done. The problem is the reality of the markets, the public markets, take a while to sink into the startup ecosystem. So it's still very early in the impact of COVID on the venture and startup world, and we'll learn more. The last thing, which a lot of physical science startups play in, whether it's electronics, semiconductors, robotics, software, is that it's kind of uncertain what's going to happen with U.S.-China relationships. This has been brewing for a while, and COVID is just adding more fuel to the fire, and in a way that could really split the global economy and chop the TAMs in half for any company. It's a pretty scorched earth view of the world, but it is something we'll be asking when we invest: is how does this company get affected if China ends up being an area where you cannot sell to? So that's just a quick view of COVID, happy to answer questions on that. But I really wanted to talk to you all today about university startups. So, we're local in Philadelphia. We are always active and excited about coming to Penn campus, and I'm on the physical science team, and there's a whole life science team at OUP that's mostly doing therapeutics investment. And I just wanted to quickly highlight kind of some things that we think about, and why I do this is, why do I invest in university startups? Is because, if I was still a grad student like I was in the early 2000s, there's no better time to be an academic. Let's take pre-COVID, but there's no better time to be an academic because, when I was coming out of grad school, there was either you go the professor route or you go work for industry. And back then, there were very few of the exciting tech companies that we now have today, like Google and Facebook and Netflix, that are doing amazing R&D programs that you never would have expected them to do. I mean, programs that are on scale with what I was doing at Lockheed Martin after grad school. So, nowadays you can add to those two things, start a company, you can go work for one of the FANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, do really exciting research. And so, I saw this at Lockheed Martin. It's one of the reasons I joined Osage, where I was excited about university research. I was bringing university research into Lockheed Martin. It was really hard to do because technology is getting only more and more complicated. And at the same time, the academics, this is around 2012, 2013, were starting to do their own things. They were working with the FANG companies. They were starting companies of their own. Venture dollars are there for really deep technology investments. And there's a really rich history of starting companies out of universities. I mean, here's a sample of like 8 that I think are all multi-billion-dollar companies. So Google is obviously massive. If you look at them on a chart, it's like you have to do a log plot for their exit value. But that was a long time ago. But more recently, Control Labs was a hardware company out of Columbia that was acquired for $1 billion. Databricks is still a private company, but valued well over $6 billion in the database space. Mobileye was an Israeli company that was bought by Intel. Horus was a surgical robotics company that was acquired for several $billion. So there's just an amazing history of university startups that I think should be thought of as a way to a new path for technology transition. As I've learned from the tech transfer offices we work with, the previous path for transferring your discoveries out of a university lab to the Samsungs or the Intels of the world through licensing is just at a reduced pace. It's just really hard to do that, especially out of physical sciences. And so to the extent that you all are academics and want to see your technology go into the world, the path forward is leaning towards you taking care of it yourself or you finding a team to do it. And I think that's a great way to control your own destiny and control the destiny of the technologies that you've created. It's really hard for other people to do it, both financially and from a pure technology perspective. You can't just take a patent and make a better gyro anymore. It's just such an integrated software hardware contraption that these new technologies are impossible to just license over a patent. The other reasons to do it, and I'm really passionate, I think there's a dramatic opportunity to just grow as a person and a leader by running your own company. It's amazing when we talk to faculty who are used to running 20-person labs, the difference in managing, even if they're not the CEO, managing the integration of technology in a startup. It's just a different level of career growth, and I think it's an exciting thing that a lot of faculty have come out of, successful or failed, and we just want to do it again. It's also becoming a big tool for recruiting. In certain areas, repeat entrepreneurial faculty, are spawning other entrepreneurial faculty or academics, and you can see this. We track it, and we really pay attention to it of, which faculty have started multiple companies because they end up getting grad students who are, very intelligent, very charismatic, and want to start their own companies too. And so it's a great recruiting tool in the new world of startups. And I think it's something I think I've talked about at Penn. I've talked about with Penn, and other universities are starting to take it seriously. How do you start to integrate startups into the tenure process? And so it's something that I think is important as a tool to get the best talent into your department and into your lab. Lastly, as I hinted at, like, there's just a tremendous amount of wealth being generated out of some of these startups, not in the salary, like you're not going to be making a lot of money at these startups, but in success, you owning a couple percent of a billion-dollar company is an incredible opportunity. And so I don't think anyone in the academic world is purely driven on personal wealth, but it is a very nice way to add to the reasons of why do this. And expanding on the plot of, expanding on the 6 or 7 logos I had before, this is kind of a snapshot of very valuable university startups. We're tracking thousands of university startups at OUP. On the x-axis, it's the total venture dollars raised by a startup, and then on the y-axis is the last valuation or exit value of these companies. So, this is just an eye chart. It's just meant to show you how many companies are valued at well over $100 million, which is, really hard to get to. Most university startups do not end up being valued at more than $100 million, let alone exiting for more than $100 million. But it's a healthy mix of both therapeutics or both life science companies and tech companies. The tech companies are in green, the life science companies are in dark blue. And these are all university startups across the ones that we track. So I think this represents several hundred of them. And it's just a really exciting space. And I think there's a blog post that I probably should be updating, which is some of the exits in the university space. So too deep of a dive for this conversation, but just because a company is valued today at $100 million doesn't mean anyone would buy them for $100 million today. A lot of these companies on here have been acquired for where they're at on the y-axis. I also just wanted to give you a deep dive into Penn. So we're tracking all of Penn startups. We've been tracking them for a long time. There's been $6 billion raised by, just over 350 startups that have spun out of Penn in our system since 2008. This is a staggering number. I remember the first time I rolled this up for some of our individual universities, I just didn't realize the magnitude of how much venture dollars they have raised at any university. And Penn's right up there with the best. And, we're dealing with rounds of 10, 50 million, $75 million sometimes, but you just never think it could roll up to $5 or $6 billion. And, when you break it down to the ones that have actually raised VC dollars out of the 350, 36 of the 36 Penn engineering, phys sci, software startups have raised VC dollars. And the average VC dollars raised is $7.5 million. And versus 20 million across, the average the other universities in the engineering space. It's interesting to think about this. Penn is obviously very focused on life science. They have an incredible number of excellent therapeutics companies that have spun out. But I just would expect over time, hopefully this number grows as the software efforts and computer science efforts at Penn grow. And those are the areas that really attract a lot of attention. And just more companies spin out of the ecosystem. But as Lori was saying, the Penn Innovation Center is incredible. Most universities do not have that type of resource and available to them. Even some of the universities that have historically been working on startups for a very long time, MIT, Berkeley, Stanford, they don't have a place like that where you can go work and be alongside other professionals and other startups and other academics. So, I think resources like that, I'm hoping will drive more startup creation out of the engineering departments and catch up to, I don't think it'll ever catch up to the life science side. It just doesn't happen at any university. The 60 or so life science startups at Penn have raised an average VC dollars of $95 million per company, which involves some very large numbers, large companies that have raised a lot of money to bring up that average, but it's well higher than the average university at the average university. So, as everyone knows, strong life science presence at Penn, and hopefully a growing presence for the tech physical sciences world. And I'd love to be a part of that. So if you ever want to brainstorm on companies and think about what could make for a successful startup, this is why we exist. We're here to help, as is the Penn Innovation Center and Lori's team. So if there's no questions on that, I'll just jump to kind of a, interest of, if you have a new idea. So that was about why you should do a new startup. This
Manny,
has been
There's actually two questions in the chat that
sure.
we could address now or at the end. It's up to you. But
No, let's do it now.
they're pretty interesting questions, and I think relevant to kind of the broader context you've been talking about. The first one is, can you comment on the status of the startup space in the Philadelphia area compared to other U.S. startup hubs like the Bay Area, Boston, et cetera, since you guys, are active nationally? Actually, it'd be great to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's it'd be interesting to see what happens post-COVID. Pre-COVID, I think you cannot really expect to match what's going on in the Bay Area and Boston and Seattle. And the main thing that those areas have, which many other major university cities don't have, is like a cadre of really experienced industry people looking for their next thing. So you don't have beginning startup talent at in the Bay Area or in Boston. You have either people who have just rolled out of their recent startup success or failure, or rolled out of a major corporation, Akamai, Facebook, mingling with university researchers and nailing down what matters, which is product market fit. And so in that sense, we don't have that in Philly as well as I wish it would be. In the general startup ecosystem in Philly, there's a few notable startups, but not as many deep tech heavy startups as I would normally see. So I'd say in general, the talent hasn't been here to support the ideas that come out of the university ecosystem in a way that I would love. But when we work with university startups, we don't care about geography. We care about the technology and the team. And with the right team, we will try and attract new talent to it. So we'll help recruit entrepreneurs to come to a startup. It's hard to do. It's we prefer if the startup comes to us with a great team that's the academics plus, let's say, a business person. But that's one thing that I think if you're open to hiring, you can sometimes work with others to help you find those people. And I think Philadelphia is an attractive place to be. I think post-COVID, it's going to be, for the next year and a half or so, people are going to be less likely to want to stay in New York and San Francisco. So I think in general, the truth is Philadelphia hasn't been a great place for entrepreneurship, pure technology entrepreneurship, and it's a hard problem to solve.
Okay, thanks. Our next two questions, and then I think let's move on to the rest of your presentation. One, I think, is a segue into what you were just talking about. Is it harder for startups to raise money in Philly? And do you have any idea of the probability of success of Penn Startups in the life sciences in terms of probability of acquisition or IPO? And I'll just add for the person who asked that question, we have had a few IPOs in the last few years out of Penn, which is really exciting. So I'm curious to hear if you have a probability of success kind of formula you'd like to talk about.
So the first part of the question was, is it harder to raise venture dollars in Philadelphia than other places? I think it's getting incredibly easy to access venture dollars across the country, Bay Area venture investors from anywhere in the country. There's been, as I mentioned earlier, there's just so much venture capital on the market today that it is a seller's market, and venture investors are looking for great deals. And the hardest part is, for you all, it is raising that first round. And there are a few investors, like mainstream investors, who will say, I'm not going to invest unless you move to the West Coast. And the way it typically works is those investors are the types of investors you'd want to move to the West Coast for. So if that's the quid pro quo of their investment, it's probably one of those types of deals where it's worth taking. But that being said, a lot of times when you raise your first round, there's not going to be that kind of pressure to move to the West Coast. It's a matter of, can you network well enough to those people to find them and get the conversation going. And I think that comes down to you, not where you're based. So, uh,
Okay.
yeah, the probability side of this, like, I don't have an answer for that. And yeah, I haven't really thought too much about it on our life sciences team. What I can say is IPOs are really exciting, but in the recent world, the recent markets, in the venture markets, IPOs are just another funding event. These companies haven't really cracked the nut. They haven't gotten FDA approval. They haven't gotten through phase 2 and phase 3, and so it's just another financing event. And I think it's still really early in the world of, let's say, drug development, where most of the IPOs are occurring, to know if the probability of success, which I think should really mean, does this drug come to market, whether the probability of success is going up or not, to make sense of how many companies are going public. From a venture perspective, the probability of making money seems to have gone up in the life science world because they go public and we can sell our shares after a certain period of time. And so it's an interesting time where I talk a lot about this with life science team is, has the probability of a drug or the science converting to a drug increased? And we don't know yet.
Okay, great. Thanks for commenting on that, and thanks for those excellent questions. And
Yeah, keep them coming.
let's go to the next portion.
Sure. So this is, kind of just a quick explainer of, what to do if you've got a new idea. So, it's simple to think of, you've got this innovation in the lab, another 2D material, the next generation graphene, and you're going to be rich. But it's much more complicated than that. I think if you dive, I don't know if this slide's in here, but if you dive into why startups fail, and why specifically university startups fail, it's rarely because the technology didn't work. It's mostly because of many other factors that involve the path to success. So, but you have that idea, and but it's just the beginning is the way to think of it. Where you should really focus is, that what is the product? As soon as you can, I like to tell faculty and grad students that are spinning a company out, just freeze the research, freeze the technology development, and focus on the product development, and be scrappy. Like very few venture investors, some do, say you're not spending fast enough. Most often you'll hear from a venture investor, or like I'll hear from a venture investor, man, they've been really scrappy with their money. They've done a lot with a little, and that's what you want to be prepared to do. And don't seek financial wealth through the startup only. You want to think about the value of the company as important. It affects your dilution. I'm not going to get into dilution math here. It's very simple, but we value a company at a certain amount, and we give you X million dollars on that valuation. And the higher the valuation, the better for your personal, let's say, wealth and success. But it also matters who you're taking the money from. Are they going to help you take $2 million and turn it into $20 million of value? And so it's not just about the round you're raising now, it's how much can you create for the next round. And be prepared, and this is all about pitching 101, which is like a different talk that we give. But make sure you have your version of the elevator pitch, your story, your driving thesis prepared. When you think about raising a company, raising a round, and how you pitch a company, like there's 3 key tenets that we evaluate on almost exclusively, and it's the management first and foremost. So, earliest days, you're just before you're raising your first round, what matters, and the management team is incredibly important. So if usually a professor is at the top of their field, in some way when they decide to spin out a company, and it's important for us to know that and just be aware of that and make sure that they're bringing the best quantum computing system to market, or the best quantum computing system approach to the market, and just verify that it's not in the kind of underbelly of certain technology areas, that it's really kind of an approach that's not mainstream but is validated or approved or well researched is kind of an important way to think about it. The other part that's important out of management is hard because it's not necessarily there before you raise your first round, but it's the industry insights. Like specifically in the tech world, in the engineering world, it's important to understand what the real, vision is for how this fits into industry. And it's separate than need. It's just like we want the team, someone on the team, to be insightful about industry problems and understand the dynamics of selling. Understanding industry insights can come through the amazing number of industry relationships that some faculty have. There's a lot of work that Lori's done, that universities do to bring in industry clients to universities, and those relationships should be aggressively fostered when you're deciding to spin out a company. Go probe them about, how things evolve and get bought into a specific industry to make sure it's a good place for you to be. And the last one on selling dynamics, it's unlikely that any faculty or grad student who hasn't done a startup before or been in industry before really understands the complexities of selling. And that's something that only comes through experience. If you can get a person on your team that understands what people want to buy, which is different than what they want, that is a person you should bring in as soon as possible. It's hard to find the Steve Jobs CEO before you raise your first round, but it is possible to find your VP of product. Those are the types of things we suggest you bring into your team. Someone who understands what products are and how you take a technology and turn it into a product that people want to buy. So that's the management side of this. And then, on the need, a lot of times university spinouts have the technology, metal organic frameworks, let's say, in the material space, that the DoD is funded for 10 or 20 years, and they want to spin out a company to commercialize metal organic frameworks. And what are they going to do? They're going to sell hydrogen storage systems because that's what the DoD funded them to do, and it must be important. But there's multiple problems with that, and first and foremost is it's a commodity market. Many others have tried and failed to do that. So you want to think of what the real need is for the product that you want to sell, and make sure that first application is actually manageable for a startup to sell into. And we also just love people that have become students of the field and understand what's failed and succeeded in the startup industry in the space that you're going after. So there's lots of value. Like in iCore, they have you go talk to a lot of customers about your potential product. What's also great when you do that is to understand who else has tried to sell to them and who's failed. And that's something it makes you be a student of the field and helps you craft the real need for your problem. The science, I think this is kind of doesn't need to be discussed with the audience on the call today. But I think one thing that's often said in early calls with university startups that I dislike, and I'm happy to expand upon it if people want, but oftentimes I hear, we've had 15 million of DARPA funding over the past 5 years. That's basically my seed capital. So I'm at a Series A company and I'm worth $100 million. And unfortunately, if you talk to these companies 5 years later, the entrepreneurs, the professors, the grad students say, oh, wow, I didn't realize just how much more work it would take to get this product ready from the prototype it was at. So it's important to have prototypes, but just realize there's a long road ahead beyond that. So as I said, the most important aspect of all of this for us is the team. And there's lots of different, key aspects of a team. I'll jump into that a little bit, but the one that we really focus in on is the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur doesn't have to be the non-academic. It can be an academic. There are academic entrepreneurs. There usually is like one or two people in a company that we think of as the entrepreneur and the visionary, and that person, if they're a novice, they show in their inexperience a level of modesty that makes you think that they can bring in the right people around them. And ultimately, the novice entrepreneur is unlikely to be the long-term CEO of a company, but they could be. And you just kind of look for the people that know they might step aside. They might have to step aside at the right point for someone like a serial entrepreneur. Like there's no better person to bring into the ideal person to bring into your company at any point is someone who's sold a few startups in your space, in your sector, for a large enough value that they made their former venture investors a lot of money. That's like the ideal CEO to bring into your team. It's really hard to find that person, but that sort of entrepreneur is just an incredible way to short circuit the one of the most significant problems of any university engineering startup, which is fundraising. It's really hard to fundraise. That person who's raised money from venture before and made a lot of money for those venture investors just short circuits that problem. They can raise capital. The last is someone that kind of is active. The last person, the corporate entrepreneur, is an intriguing opportunity. I mean, these are people that come from industry, big corporate environments, Fortune 500 companies, and they have a wealth of experience, understanding the problems in industry, and they just want to start a company. They want to get out of the corporate world, and they can be interesting entrepreneurs as well. And it's the only kind of thing to be wary of as you think about working with those people with that type of CV is, are they really ready for the kind of 80-hour life, do everything, no executive's assistant world of startups? So that's kind of the different flavor of entrepreneurs we see. I thought I'd mention. Some of the key characteristics of what we look for as you think about starting a company, what to hone in yourself, and it's hard to change who you are, but it's important to know what matters when we look at and evaluate people. So all of these are important. I'm not going to go through these. I just bolded the most important ones to me personally. Track record of success is important. If you're a professor who started a company before, that's actually it's interesting to know about, especially if it's been successful. You always just look for people who are, deep learners, people that, if you have your PhD, you just finished grad school, we know you can learn, but are you taking the time and meeting the right people to learn about the business side, the finance 101 side of things, to make sure that you are very adept at all the aspects of running a company at the earliest days. We also just want someone that's a hands-on person that is, can delegate work, but can also do any job that comes up in the path of a startup. And I think the last one it's always surprising how often it comes up. Startups that are not transparent, entrepreneurs that are not transparent, just raise flags. And sometimes it's around their withholding of key technology discriminators. Sometimes it's in the way they shade their background, certain aspects of their history that I think you should think about for yourself as venture investors in investing in a company. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Like, we are going to call former employees you may have worked with, former grad students, anyone that has really done good diligence on a company, has done almost more diligence on the people they're investing in than the market they're going after. And so we'll find out a lot of the information if you're hiding it, but just the lack of transparency just prevents discussions from happening. Like, if you end up having a veil of secrecy in your first one or two calls, it can really kill a deal. And so that's just something to think about. It's unlikely that a venture investor will ever steal your technology, especially in the university space. Even if you told me everything about your technology, I couldn't transfer that to another company in a way that was meaningful or hurt you all. I'm going to skip this slide in the spirit of time. I just will say that it's important to be entrepreneurial and academic at the earliest days, but at some point, it's more important to have the business side on your senior team, someone who understands product market fit and selling. And those two people have to work well together. And it's hard to find that person. And for university startups, for us, the academic is the most important person in the company early on. And we would really, I don't think we've ever invested in a university startup that hasn't had the academic involved at the earliest days, whether it's the grad student or the researcher. But over time, usually there's a full-time CEO, professional CEO that comes in, and it only works well if the academic and the entrepreneur work well together. So this is kind of a funny slide my colleague put together. I think the ideal team for a university startup, sometimes after you raise your first round, this is pretty obvious. all the way on the right, you might have the grad student who has become the CTO. It's unusual for a faculty member to really be able to stay on for the full life cycle of a company. They typically fall into the Daenerys Targaryen, if you're following Game of Thrones, role over time, where either they just start out as an advisor or they over time become an advisor. But they're still a core founder of the company. There's a whole other talk of how you distribute equity amongst these types of personalities in a company, and I'm happy to do that offline with anyone. But the key founders usually end up being the CTO and the founding professor that take a different role over time when people like the CEO can come in from an experienced position that can instantly make the company more credible from a fundraising and business discussion perspective. I'll mention the Jon Snow character, which is meant to be the person that really just kind of he or she just ends up coming up with the most fantastic ideas for where to apply the technology. Sometimes that person is worthy of a co-founding title if you bring them in early. And this is someone that I think is easier to track down than a CEO. And so as you all think about starting your company, that middle person, your Jon Snow, is one of the more important people to bring in to a university spin-out. So I think in the 10 minutes we have left, I just wanted to quickly mention that let me look at the slides. So this was meant to, I'll show these slides later. Know your investor base, know the different stages of where your company is, and target the right types of investors for that. In the
Manny,
recent years,
can I just interrupt for 1 second? Will you send us the slides or some version of them so we can share them with everyone? Okay, great. Thanks. Continue.
Yeah. So there's another slide I'll add that I didn't include here, which is the right investors for the stage of the company. Certain investors just operate across all stages. Certain investors are more Series B, Series C rounds. The reality of some of these, billion-dollar funds is for the right deal, they'll give you, $300,000. They'll be a seed investor just so they can maybe have a better eye for when you need $20 million in a single check. So, but it's important to know the different ways you can access capital. And also for university startups, there's some really valuable incubators out there, whether it's JLabs, which I think has a spot in Pennovation, to Silicon Catalyst, which is a great incubator for semiconductor companies on the West Coast, to Y Combinator, which is starting to bring in some biotech and other deep technology companies. The value of them is not necessarily in the incubator process they run you through, or the accelerator process. It's in the network they access for you, the investors you get exposed to, and learning from how those people there and your colleagues in the cohort how to do what you're doing. And lastly, university startups have a great opportunity to access non-dilutive government dollars, whether it's through SBIR, STTR work, or NSF work. It is something that is an art to know when to stop taking it, but oftentimes it is a great way to get early money into your company when it's harder to raise capital from pure venture. I wanted to give everyone a quick snapshot of our process as a venture firm. So if you come to us with a deal, it's in the top of this pipeline. We look at everything. If you send us a pitch deck to our email address, we'll look at it, and I hope we write back to you. I can't promise all venture investors will, but we evaluate 100 deals a month. It feels like sometimes, and the process that you all should follow, I'll jump into later of who to reach out to, but the process ends up being, if it looks interesting, I'll have a call with the company. If that was, a productive call and I really like the team and what they're doing, I think most firms like ours, will just kind of create a quick little caucus where they'll bring in a couple of their other colleagues to have a deeper conversation with the startup. And then, not until after then, are you really engaged? Should you consider yourself engaged with a venture firm? Sometimes startups say after one call that, Fund X is really looking at my deal. It's not really until you have a partner involved in the discussions with you as a startup that you should really think that things are moving forward. And it's typically not until 2 to 4 calls are there for you to think that something could move forward, because then you're in this due diligence area. And due diligence is a pretty long process. It can be as fast as 2 weeks, a week to 2 weeks, for companies that are just incredibly sought after by venture investors. Companies that have a really exceptional entrepreneur, to 3 months sometimes. So it's a long process. Expect lots of calls. Look forward to it. Get feedback from it. Most often, it's not going to turn into what's called a term sheet. A term sheet is a venture investor's offer to probably invest in you. It's a signed document, but it's not binding. It has lots of interesting terms in it that I suggest you all learn about if you're doing a startup. There's a great book called Venture Deals by Brad Feld that goes through all the different aspects of a term sheet. But it's kind of it's like an engagement period is the best way to describe it. And it's not until the deal is closed that you're married. That's when they basically hand you money. There's no contractual obligation to close when you sign a term sheet with a startup, when a venture investor signs a term sheet with a startup. So I think in these times that we're facing post-COVID, I think we've seen term sheets not turn into closed deals, and I think we'll see some more of that as the bar gets raised on all deals. No time for this, but I just say this is a quick highlight of where venture dollars are going in industry. I think it should be clear to everyone. Like I want to say loud and clear, software just controls the venture industry. It's the orange bars here, the IT bars, and a tremendous amount of money is being poured into software companies across the world. And software is starting to blend into the physical world too. So as you think about your hardware or material startup, adding a software flavor to what you're doing is not important just purely from a hype perspective, but there's a real revenue reason as to why you kind of can. It's important to build a recurring software model on top of the hardware you might sell. So I want to try and find one more slide to talk about. Let's talk about this one. So I've been really impressed about how faculty and grad students and startups manage the venture process of who to talk to. It's actually in general been a very low ego process where, like when I was first starting a venture, I'd have a call with like a Nobel laureate professor and surprised it was such a low ego process where they didn't care that they weren't talking to the top person at my fund. But every so often, you'll come across a team, a CEO, or someone who just thinks that they should instantly be getting to an investment decision within a day and talking to the managing director of the fund. And that's just not how the process works. And it's for good reason. It's because, the venture funds are pretty flat organizations where a managing partner will have a few associates under them. And they just couldn't handle the massive number of deals that would be coming to them if they were always the first person on the call. And so as you think about how to reach out to the venture world, in general, cold emails are fine. It's better to get an introduction. If you have a connection with a managing director, great, take it. If you end up getting filtered down to an associate or a principal like myself, take it. It's just part of the process that happens. And it's, I think venture is meant to be a low ego world because we've lost money. And we know that even if we think we're making the best decision, we will lose money every so often. And we appreciate the same level of ego amongst the people we're working with. So I think I'll just stop there and leave it on this slide, which is the biggest disparity that's hard to get over. But I think you have to realize that good venture investors are trying to find every excuse to get to a no, and it's hard to get to a yes. Like we are until the day we wire money, we are looking for an excuse not to give money out. And some venture investors are different, but it's an exciting place to work when you can get an entrepreneur who knows that their job is to get you to a yes and not sell, not purely sell, but really kind of craft the story that can overcome the variety of no's that we come across in our process. Because no deal is perfect, no deal is obvious. It's oftentimes some of the best deals that we do are the ones where half the partnership thinks we shouldn't do it, half the partnership thinks we should, and we still get over the line. And so it's hard to have all these certainties figured out, but um, I'll just leave it at that and say like your job as you think about building a startup is thinking of all the no's that could come up and having a good story as to why an investor should still invest despite all those. So I'll stop there. Realize I had way too
Um,
many slides for an hour.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I thank you for doing a great job of pulling out the key highlights and especially um, what you said here at the end was, I think, great advice. One of the qualities of being an entrepreneur that's often talked about that we try to highlight is persistence. And
mhm.
so, you're being passionate about what you're doing and is really important so you can be persistent since you're going to need to be to get that no to a yes. So, hearing it from your perspective, I thought was fantastic. And no one's put any additional questions in the chat, but we do have a minute if anyone wants to throw something up. Um, but in the meantime, I just wanted to ask one quick question before we sign off. I mean, this can be in the context of COVID or just beyond. What are the hot new kind of technologies, or what are the future trends in terms of investments that you're either getting a lot of pitches for, so now you're
Yeah,
seeing a lot of emergence, or what are you guys looking for your portfolio that you think is new and cutting edge and important?
right. Yeah, it's hard to forecast the future on this, but where we're looking, where we're seeing a lot of activity. Let's start sort of more on the hard tech side. I think there's room for new forms of computing, and what we look for is opportunities where people are able to uh, not, we're able to build a new platform for uh, processing that isn't what I'm looking for is something that's not just purely focused on AI ML, which is from a hardware perspective hard to bet on. It's for two reasons. You know, I think deep learning and machine learning are incredibly important, but who knows what the latest and greatest algorithm is going to be in 10 years in that world. So I'm thinking of, where I'm interested is just new computing platforms, new computing paradigms that aren't just about how do you make um, a better GPU or a better inference processor, because I think the algorithms will be different in 10 years. And what people don't realize is there's just a tremendous number of software solutions that people have to that world. So, I think you'll find that there is uh, a renewed intrigue for compute. If not only all the stuff that was happening with quantum computing 2 years ago, uh, but I think there needs to be something in between the computing we have today and where people think computing is going to go in the future with quantum computing. There's not this interim vision that I've heard yet, and I'm really excited to hear from researchers that have ideas there. In the materials world, it's hard to describe what's important from a tech perspective. What I think is exciting is for materials blending with uh, like really brilliant products. So products that unlock value. And I encourage anyone that's in the material space to look at two companies, one that we did invest in, one that we didn't. Newmat is a company that makes gas tanks that store subatmospheric value. They can basically sell them for 100x what they actually cost to make because they unlock value for the semiconductor industry. Appeal makes a coating for fruits and vegetables that lets Haas ship avocados to China for the first time. So they're not selling the material, they're selling the solution. So I really encourage you all to think about that. In the software space, I think everything's in general all about AI and ML and cyber, and I think when you think about those activities, um, when you position your company as a vertically focused opportunity in um, something like finance or real estate or e-commerce, you're more likely to attract venture interest than if you're just a platform. A platform being we can prune your ML algorithms better than anyone else, or we are the go-to way to do data monitoring, data fidelity monitoring. I think you have to think about a vertical application driven by the vertical you're going to sell the best to. So no deep insights in software except for, I think, the venture attention is clearly on AI and ML, and then also some flares of AI and ML for bio and biotech applications.